We have passed an important milestone. The Justice Department's Inspector General has now been investigating Operation Fast and Furious, the scandal there, for longer than the Warren Commission needed to produce its report on the JFK assassination. Fast and Furious allowed thousands of U.S. guns to be taken into Mexico and sold to narco-terror groups. Some of those guns have been used for murders by cartels against Mexican citizens and others involved in the murders of 3 U.S. law enforcement agents. Why this program was started in the first place doesn't make much sense, but why it was allowed to continue for so long has boggled the mind until now. Let's start with a myth. Have you heard that 90% of the guns being used by drug cartels in Mexico are coming from the United States? Well, it was that myth that prompted the Justice Department and the ATF, first under President Bush and to continue under President Obama, to enact a program to track U.S. guns being sold into Mexico. But were the operations Gunrunner and Fast and Furious really based upon facts? The answer is no. While the ATF has said that 90% of all the guns being found at crime scenes in Mexico have come from the United States, those numbers are simply not accurate. According to a 2008 report from the Government Accountability Office, 90% of all the guns in Mexico that are confiscated by Mexican authorities and then sent back to the United States are confirmed to have come from the U.S. But how many guns are we actually talking about? According to the GAO, fewer than 11%. The rest don't come back here for verification because Mexican authorities are able to identify those weapons as from China, Venezuela, and the largest number belong to Mexican military. So when Fast and Furious and Gunrunner began, they were operations based upon a flawed idea. But as the operations went forward, agents with the ATF, under the direction of the Justice Department, began working with gun store owners in Arizona. Now, these agents would order owners to sell multiple weapons to repeat buyers. Those straw buyers were then taking the weapons south of the border and selling them to drug cartels. The feds were supposed to be tracking those weapons as they went south, but they started losing track of them. Even after losing track, the feds kept the program going. It wasn't until Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed with one of those guns that the curtain came down and investigations into what the feds were doing took place. So the question here, did the feds have another motive as part of the reason for pushing Fast and Furious, even after they started to lose control of the program? Well, documents obtained by CBS News show that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, discussed using their covert operation Fast and Furious to argue for controversial new rules about gun sales. Emails show they discussed using the sales, including the sales encouraged by the ATF, to justify a new gun regulation called Demand Letter 3. That would require some U.S. gun shops to report the sale of multiple rifles or long guns. Demand Letter 3, by the way, was so called because it would be the third ATF program demanding that gun dealers report tracing information. On April 25th of this year, ATF announced plans to implement Demand Letter 3. Now, the National Shooting Sports Foundation is suing the ATF to stop these new rules. It calls the regulation an illegal attempt to enforce a law that Congress never passed. The ATF is countering that it has reasonably targeted guns used most often to commit violent crimes in Mexico, especially by drug gangs. So here's what you need to know. These repeated gun sales that the ATF is so worried about preventing were only happening with Fast and Furious because the feds were forcing gun dealers to sell those rifles. Is it any wonder that the American people can't trust Washington? The bottom line here, the feds created the problem that resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of Mexican people dying violent deaths. They then got caught, but are still trying to move forward with a law to protect the people in Mexico from the problem they created in the first place. By the way, I'll let you know when the internal investigation on Fast and Furious is over with. And that is Reality Check.
Since the Colorado theater shooting, most of the media has wanted to jump all over the issue of whether or not AR-15 rifles and assault weapons should even be sold to the public. It is the same story every time an incident like this happens. Most of the arguments wind up centered on the Second Amendment. So what was the Second Amendment really about, and what does it protect? These kind of weapons. Ben has the Reality Check you won't see anywhere else.
Colorado Theater shooting, the national media had already resigned themselves to pontificating over the Second Amendment and the role of guns in society. Hours after that shooting in Aurora, Colorado, CNN's Piers Morgan asked this question. Quote, "You tell me a good reason why we should not strengthen the law now to stop another young man like him going into a store tomorrow, buying 4 more weapons, 6,000 rounds of ammunition on the internet, and killing and shooting another 70 people in America." Now, Piers is simply pushing a political agenda rather than looking at the facts. I told you last night that national media are ignoring major troubling questions about what happened in Colorado, and we're working on more on that coming up in the next few weeks. But tonight, we're looking at the Second Amendment. I have to warn you, though, because the Second Amendment is very politically incorrect, and the man who helped bring that to light last week, rapper Ice-T.
Yeah, it's legal in the United States. It's part of our Constitution. You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny, not the hunt.
And the thing is, Ice-T is historically correct. The Second Amendment is fairly simple, stating, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and to bear arms shall not be infringed." To be clear, the militia is not regular military. They were farmers and blacksmiths who went about their daily lives. But notice that the amendment says this is for the security of a free state. According to the 1828 dictionary and other historical documents of that day, they refer to a state as an independent nation. The Second Amendment was put in place to remind the newly formed federal or general government that each state's citizenry would be armed and ready to defend themselves should the need arise. Remember, the United States was a plural term. So what you need to know? If people like Piers Morgan want to have a real discussion on the Second Amendment, then it needs to be an honest discussion. The Second Amendment is about tyranny, not about hunting or about sport. And many Americans, frankly, don't like that. It's an uncomfortable idea. Look, you may believe that protecting yourself from government is ludicrous, and yet the ability for citizens to have not just the power to elect and to choose leaders, but also the power to protect themselves violently if necessary from tyranny is historically what the founders created. Maybe the reason we aren't having honest debates about guns in this country or the Second Amendment is because we aren't honest about why those guns were allowed in the first place. And that is Reality Check.
The emergency crews hadn't left the scene of the Colorado Theater shooting before a lot of lawmakers, politicians, and members of the media were already asking questions about how gun laws have to change. But what questions about the shooting are the media not asking? Ben has the Reality Check you won't see anywhere else.
We're going to look at this debate from 2 angles. Tonight, part 1, the questions the national media aren't asking. I don't need to go into a lot of details on this shooting because most every American is familiar with the basics. Police say 24-year-old James Holmes went into that theater in Aurora, Colorado. He was dressed in black, wearing a tactical helmet, vest, and leggings, as well as throat and groin protectors. Police say Holmes used an AR-15 assault rifle, a Remington shotgun, and a .40 caliber Glock handgun during that attack. And police say they found a second .40 caliber Glock inside of his car. The question being asked, how could he be allowed to buy those guns legally in Colorado? The question not being asked, how does an unemployed graduate student afford to buy them? Look, a decent AR-15 rifle costs $1,000 or more all by itself. The shotgun and the 2 handguns would easily run another $1,000 total. Spare mags, sights, slings, and so on, you're going to run another $1,000 across those 3 firearms. The bulletproof vest, that's easily another $800. And then you have all the money spent on bomb-making materials. Which brings us to our next question. As you know, police say that Holmes rigged his apartment with an incredibly complicated maze of fire bombs. But on the day he was arrested, he immediately told police about the bombs. Why? So our second question, where did this graduate student in neuroscience learn how to make a series of bombs so complicated that the FBI took 2 days to figure out how to disarm them? One official said the intricacy of these bombs is something rarely seen outside of war zones. He had a tripwire set behind the door to kill anyone who opened it. And yet, after setting this intricate death trap, decides to warn police about it before someone's killed? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Neither does what police are saying about this being a lone wolf attack.
All the evidence we have, every single indicator is that this is all Mr. Holmes's activity and that he wasn't particularly aided by anyone else.
But is that true? Eyewitness reports from the scene indicate that Holmes got a phone call from someone inside the theater, and also that tear gas was thrown from more than one location.
He got a phone call, and most people, when they get phone calls in theaters, they go straight out into the lobby to answer it. This person went directly to the emergency exit. He had his foot propped open by the door, and from the crack, it looked like he was signaling somebody or looking for somebody to come his way.
As I was sitting down to get my seat, I noticed that a person came up to the front row, to the front right, sat down, and as credits were going, I noticed it seemed like he got a phone call. So he went out towards the emergency exit doorway, which I thought was unusual to take a phone call.
From what we saw, he wasn't alone. He had someone with him because the second can of tear gas didn't come from his side.
So what you need to know is that there are so many questions about what really happened in Colorado. Questions we don't have answers to and we may never have answers to. What is unfortunate is that instead of really digging into why this apartment would be rigged to kill, but then Holmes would then warn police and then lawyer up and not say anything else, where he got the funding and the firearms training, and these eyewitness reports that there was more than one person, instead of asking those questions, national media want to focus all their attention on why guns were legal in the first place. National media seems too busy playing the political game, not busy enough looking into what really happened. And that is Reality Check.
If you'd like to make your voice heard on the story, head over to Ben's Facebook page. You can find it by searching Ben Swann, WXAX. I think a lot of people have those same kind of questions that you were raising. We were talking about this as soon as it happened.
That's right.
Did he act alone? You know, was the door propped open? Did he do all of this? He was just standing there afterward. There's so many unanswered questions.
A lot of questions. And remember, the very first day, a lot of people were asking about this cell phone call. Supposedly, he got a call from someone and then got up and walked out. So, you know, whether these questions are easily answered or not easily answered, media should be asking them. Police should be explaining them.
I agree.
Yeah.